The Zambezi River was life. It fed the people of Maziwa, it nourished their crops, and it carried their boats far beyond the reaches of their world. But for all its gifts, the river held secrets. Jabari knew this better than most. He had been raised on its shores, spent his childhood fishing in its shallows, and learned early that the river could be as cruel as it was kind. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Jabari stood at the water's edge with his father, Omari. They had spent the day fishing, and now their canoe lay full, a woven basket overflowing with tilapia and catfish. But something was wrong. The river was silent, too silent. The usual symphony of nature, the croaking of frogs, the chatter of birds, the splashes of unseen creatures beneath the surface, had faded. In its place, an eerie stillness hung over the water, like a warning left unsaid. Jabari shivered despite the heat. His father, Omari, tightened his grip on his fishing spear. His wrinkled face, carved by years of hardship and wisdom, remained unreadable. Then he muttered under his breath, "The river is watching tonight." Jabari frowned but didn't question him. When Omari spoke like that, it was best to listen. They gathered their things and left. Behind them, the water rippled. A dark shape shifted beneath the surface. The hippo was watching too. "Where is Tano?" Mama Asha's voice, thick with worry, cut through the evening air. The villagers gathered in the open clearing at the heart of Maziwa, their faces flickering in the firelight. "I saw him near the reeds before sunset," said Baraka, a lanky teenager who had been helping his father collect firewood. "He was chasing frogs." A murmur passed through the crowd. Everyone knew the unspoken rule. No one played near the river after dark. Omari was the first to move. "We search now," he said firmly. Jabari grabbed a burning torch and joined his father. The search party spread out, calling Tano's name. Minutes passed, then an hour. Jabari was the first to spot the tiny footprints in the mud. They led toward the reeds, but then suddenly stopped. A deep, unnatural crater in the earth marked the place where something massive had stood. Omari knelt, his fingers tracing the deep groove. His face darkened. "Hippo," he murmured, "a big one." Then Jabari saw the small sandal, half buried in the dirt. A chill ran down his spine. Something was out there, something big, and it was hunting. The next morning, the river gave back what it had taken. Tano's body was found at dawn, half submerged in the shallows. His small frame had been shattered, not by teeth, but by sheer force. The bones in his chest had been crushed, as though something had stomped on him over and over again. A heavy silence fell over the village. Mama Asha's screams shattered it. The elders gathered, speaking in hushed voices. Hippos were dangerous, yes, but they did not kill for sport. They did not hunt, but this one had. "This is no ordinary beast," Omari said at last. "This is something else." Jabari felt anger rising in his chest. "Then we kill it." The villagers murmured, uncertain. Omari's gaze swept over the crowd. "A hippo is no lion. It does not fear fire. It does not flee from spears. If we are to kill it, we must be smarter." The meeting ended, but the fear remained. That night, no one went near the river, but the river came to them. The attack came just before midnight. Baraka's father, Njoroge, had stayed late by the shore, repairing his fishing net. He was a cautious man, always listening, always watching, but he did not hear the beast until it was too late. A shadow rose from the water, silent and massive. Two gleaming eyes caught the moonlight, and then a roar, a sound like thunder tearing through the earth. Njoroge barely had time to turn before the hippo charged. The force of the impact sent him sprawling into the reeds. The hippo did not stop. It crushed him underfoot, then again, until the night air was filled with the sound of snapping bones. By the time the villagers arrived, torches in hand, there was nothing left but blood in the reeds. Jabari clenched his fists. This was no longer about a rogue hippo. This was a war. The village of Maziwa had known death before. Droughts had stolen crops, crocodiles had taken fishermen, and sickness had claimed the weak. But never had they faced something like this. A killer lurked in the river, and it was not finished. At dawn, Omari and Jabari stood outside a small hut on the village's outskirts. Smoke curled from a dying fire, and in the doorway sat an old man, his hands rough from years of battle with the wild. Kamau. Once, he had been the greatest hunter in the region. He had walked the savannas and jungles, faced the dangers of lions, leopards, and elephants. But the years had weighed him down, and now he lived alone. A relic of a time when men stood between nature and destruction. Omari cleared his throat. Kamau, we need your help. The old man lifted his eyes, clouded with age but still sharp. The river speaks, he said. I heard it in the wind last night. The spirits are restless. Jabari tensed. He hated when the elders spoke in riddles. This is not a spirit, he said. It's a hippo, a beast that must be put down. Kamau's lips curled in a grim smile. That's what you think? He leaned forward. I have hunted many creatures, boy. I have killed lions that had tasted human flesh. I have tracked elephants gone mad with rage. But a rogue hippo... He shook his head. That is a different kind of monster. Omari nodded. It has already killed twice. Kamau exhaled. Then it will not stop. He pushed himself to his feet and stepped inside his hut. Moments later, he returned with an old rifle, the wood worn smooth from decades of use. I will help you hunt it, he said. But understand this, once an animal learns the taste of fear, it becomes something else. It becomes a killer. Jabari met the old man's gaze. Then we kill it first, Kamau nodded. If we can. They began their hunt at sunrise. Kamau, Jabari, and 4 other men from the village moved along the riverbank, spears in hand, eyes scanning the water. Kamau carried his rifle, but he warned them, a hippo's skull is thick. Bullets do not always work. A clean shot to the brain is the only way. Jabari held his spear tightly. He had never fought an animal before. He had killed fish, yes, but never something that could kill him back. They found the first sign of the beast in the reeds near where Tano had died. A trail of crushed vegetation. Deep footprints the size of bowls pressed into the mud. The hippo had been here, and it was big. Kamau knelt, studying the prints. His fingers traced the edges. This one is different, he murmured. Bigger than most. Heavier. Jabari swallowed. How big? Kamau looked up. The largest I have ever seen. A crack sounded in the brush. The men froze. Kamau lifted a hand. Silence. Then the reeds exploded. A massive shape erupted from the undergrowth, its dark skin slick with river water. The hippo moved with terrifying speed, its bulk crashing through the reeds like a boulder rolling down a mountain. Jabari had no time to react. One moment he was standing, the next the world tilted as the beast plowed into the group. A scream. A man's body flew through the air, landing with a sickening crunch against a tree. Jabari hit the ground hard, breath knocked from his lungs. He scrambled to his knees, heart hammering. The hippo stood in the clearing, its massive body heaving, its wide mouth opening to reveal tusks as long as a man's arm. Kamau raised his rifle. Boom! The shot rang out, echoing across the river. The hippo staggered but did not fall. Blood sprayed from its thick hide, but it barely reacted. Its eyes burned with something unnatural. Rage. It charged again. Kamau dove aside, rolling into the mud. Another man tried to run, but the hippo was faster. It lunged, jaws clamping down. A sickening crunch. Blood splattered across the grass. The man's scream was cut short as the beast tossed him aside like a rag doll. Jabari scrambled backward, spear shaking in his hands. Kamau fired again. This time the hippo roared, a sound so deep and unnatural it made the ground tremble. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and vanished into the river, leaving behind only the scent of blood and the sound of its victims' dying breaths. 2 men were dead. Baraka's older brother Mosi had been the one thrown against the tree. His skull had shattered, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles. The other, a strong warrior named Kofi, had been bitten in half. The village fell silent as their bodies were carried home. Kamau wiped the sweat from his brow. "It knows now," he muttered. "It knows we are hunting it." Omari shook his head. "It was never afraid of us." Jabari sat beside the fire that night, staring at his hands. They were still shaking. He had always thought of hippos as fat, lazy creatures. He had been wrong. This was not an animal. It was a nightmare, and it was not finished. 3 nights later, the hippo came again, but this time it did not wait for someone to come near the river. It came into the village. The first to see it was a woman fetching water from a barrel outside her hut. She turned, and there it was, looming over her, its massive form outlined by the moonlight. She did not even have time to scream. By the time the alarm was raised, the hippo was already inside the village, crushing fences, knocking over huts. People ran, shouting, grabbing spears, but nothing could stop it. It trampled through the marketplace, shattering wooden stalls. A man tried to fight it, stabbing with his spear. The hippo grabbed him in its jaws, lifted him, and slammed him down with the force of a falling tree. Bones broke like dry twigs. Kamau burst from his hut, rifle in hand. He fired, once, twice, a 3rd time. The hippo bellowed but did not fall. It turned its massive head toward Kamau. For a moment, the old hunter met its gaze, and then it charged. The hippo charged. Kamau had seen many things in his long life. He had faced leopards in the dark, heard the roar of an enraged lion, even stood his ground against a rogue elephant. But this was something else entirely. It was too fast, too big, too full of hate. He had only enough time to throw himself to the side before the beast plowed through his hut, reducing it to splinters. The old hunter hit the ground hard, his rifle flying from his grip. The hippo turned, nostrils flaring, searching for him. Its small, dark eyes gleamed in the firelight. It wasn't just rampaging, it was hunting. Screams filled the air as villagers fled in every direction. Fires were knocked over, sending embers swirling into the night. The smell of blood and smoke thickened. Jabari and Omari ran toward Kamau. "Move!" Omari shouted, throwing a spear. The weapon struck the beast's thick hide and stuck, but the hippo barely reacted. It swung its massive head, knocking over a wooden stall. Jabari grabbed Kamau's arm and hauled him to his feet. "Come on!" the hippo bellowed, then turned toward them. Its massive jaws opened wide enough to snap a man in half. Kamau stumbled, clutching his ribs. "My gun! No time!" Jabari shouted, dragging him away. The beast charged again. They barely made it behind a hut before it smashed into the wooden structure, sending debris flying. The village was in chaos. People screamed. Mothers clutched their children. Some brave men threw spears, but none of them mattered. The hippo trampled a goat, sending it rolling, then crushed a food storage hut beneath its weight. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the hippo turned and thundered back toward the river. It vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only death and destruction. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, the wailing began. Dawn came slowly, revealing the true horror of the night before. 3 people were dead. One was Maziwa, an elder who had been caught beneath a collapsing hut. Another was a young boy, barely older than Tano, trampled as he tried to run. The third was a man no one could recognize. His body was too broken. More than half of the village's food stores had been destroyed. Fences were flattened, homes ruined. The hippo hadn't just attacked, It had declared war. Omari stood in the center of the village, jaw tight. "It will return," he said. Kamau, his ribs bruised, nodded grimly. "And next time it will not leave until we are all dead." A silence settled over the villagers. No one spoke. Then Baraka, his eyes burning with fear and rage, stepped forward. "We kill it." Jabari met his gaze and nodded. "We finish this." Kamau sighed, wiping the blood from his brow. "Then we must do it right. We must trap it." The plan was dangerous. Kamau and the remaining hunters would lure the hippo into the shallows, where it was slower. There they would use fire and spears to weaken it. Kamau would take the final shot, aiming for the one spot that could kill it instantly, the thin patch of skin just behind the eyes. "If we miss," Omari warned, "we die." No one argued. They had no other choice. For the rest of the day, the men worked in silence, sharpening spears, preparing torches. The women and children were sent deeper inland, away from the river. Jabari and Kamau sat by the fire that night, watching the flickering flames. "You ever seen anything like this?" Jabari asked. Kamau exhaled, shaking his head. "No." He looked toward the river where the water stretched black and endless beneath the moon. "But I have heard stories." Jabari frowned. "What kind of stories?" Kamau's fingers tightened around his rifle. "Of men who think they own the land, the water. But they forget. The river is older than all of us. It has its own rules." He turned his gaze toward Jabari. "You think this is just a hippo?" Jabari's throat felt dry. He had seen the way the beast moved, how it had attacked them, not out of instinct, but out of malice. He said nothing. Kamau gave a bitter smile. "Tomorrow, we will see if we are stronger than the river." Before dawn, the hunters took their positions. Kamau and Jabari crouched behind a fallen tree near the shore. Omari and Baraka hid further down, torches ready. The bait, a freshly slaughtered goat, was staked in the shallows. Blood spread across the water, drifting in lazy spirals. They waited. Minutes passed. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of red and gold. Then the water rippled. Jabari held his breath. A shape emerged. Slowly, silently, the hippo rose from the river, its massive body slick with mud and blood. It exhaled through its nostrils, the sound like a deep drumbeat. It stepped forward, toward the goat. Jabari gripped his spear. His heart pounded so hard he thought the beast would hear it. Kamau lifted his rifle, aiming carefully. The hippo reached the bait, lowered its massive head. Kamau fired. The bullet struck just above the eye. Blood sprayed. The hippo roared, staggering. "Now!" Omari shouted. Flames erupted as the torches were thrown. The fire roared to life, surrounding the beast. Jabari and the hunters leaped forward, spears flashing. The hippo bellowed in rage. It was trapped, and it was not afraid. The bullet struck just above the hippo's eye. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then the beast roared, a deep, thunderous sound that shook the earth. Its massive body staggered, blood pouring from the wound, but it did not fall. Instead, it turned. Its small, burning eyes locked onto Kamau. Jabari saw the old hunter stiffen. Kamau had seen death before, but now he stared into something far worse, a demon in flesh. Omari hurled his torch. The dry reeds ignited instantly. Flames leapt into the sky, crackling and roaring, casting long, flickering shadows across the riverbank. The fire was supposed to frighten the beast. It didn't. The hippo bellowed, rearing onto its hind legs. For one terrifying moment it stood, its full, monstrous form towering over them like an unstoppable god of war. Then it dropped. The ground trembled beneath its weight as it charged. "Move!" Kamau roared. Jabari barely had time to dive aside before the hippo's tusks slammed into the fallen tree where he had been crouching. The thick trunk exploded into splinters. The beast was unstoppable. Baraka lunged, driving his spear toward its side. The weapon struck, but barely pierced the thick hide. The hippo swung its massive head. The blow lifted Baraka off his feet. He flew backward, landing hard on the rocks. His scream was cut off as blood gushed from his mouth. He did not get back up. Jabari's heart pounded. He gripped his spear, his hands slick with sweat. Kamau fired again. The shot hit the beast's shoulder. Another wound, more blood, but still it did not fall. The hippo turned toward Kamau. Omari, seeing the danger, rushed forward. With a battle cry, he drove his spear into the beast's eye. For a split second, there was silence. Then the hippo screamed. The sound was inhuman, a deep, guttural wail that sent chills down every spine. Blood gushed from its ruined eye, spraying across Omari's face. For a moment, Jabari thought they had won. Then the hippo lunged. Its jaws closed around Omari's torso. Jabari watched in horror as his father's body was lifted into the air, his legs kicking wildly. Omari gasped, just once. Then crack! The sound of ribs snapping, the sickening crunch of bones shattering like dry twigs. Omari's arms fell limp, his spear dropped from his fingers. The hippo shook him once, twice, then flung him aside like a rag doll. His broken body hit the ground. He did not move. Jabari screamed, his vision blurred with rage, with grief. Without thinking, he charged. The world narrowed to one thought: kill the beast. His spear plunged deep into the hippo's side. This time, the beast reacted. It roared and swung its head toward him. Jabari ducked, narrowly avoiding the massive tusks, but the hippo twisted. Its bulk slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. The beast loomed over him, blood dripping from its jaws. It was going to finish him. Kamau, despite his injuries, raised his rifle one last time. Boom! The bullet tore through the hippo's throat. The beast staggered. Blood poured from the gaping wound. Its breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps. Jabari scrambled backward. The hippo took a step forward, then another. Then finally, its massive legs buckled. With a final heaving breath, it collapsed. The earth shook as the monster fell. Silence. Then the flames crackled. The battle was over. "Move!" Kamau roared. Jabari barely had time to dive aside before the hippo's tusks slammed into the fallen tree where he had been crouching. The thick trunk exploded into splinters. The beast was unstoppable. Baraka lunged, driving his spear toward its side. The weapon struck but barely pierced the thick hide. The hippo swung its massive head. The blow lifted Baraka off his feet. He flew backward, landing hard on the rocks. His scream was cut off as blood gushed from his mouth. He did not get back up. Jabari's heart pounded. He gripped his spear, his hands slick with sweat. Kamau fired again. The shot hit the beast's shoulder. Another wound, more blood. But still, it did not fall. The hippo turned toward Kamau. Omari, seeing the danger, rushed forward. With a battle cry, he drove his spear into the beast's eye. For a split second, there was silence. Then, the hippo screamed. The sound was inhuman, a deep, guttural wail that sent chills down every spine. Blood gushed from its ruined eye, spraying across Omari's face. For a moment, Jabari thought they had won. Then the hippo lunged. Its jaws closed around Omari's torso. Jabari watched in horror as his father's body was lifted into the air, his legs kicking wildly. Omari gasped, just once, then crack. The sound of ribs snapping, the sickening crunch of bones shattering like dry twigs. Omari's arms fell limp. His spear dropped from his fingers. The hippo shook him once, twice, then flung him aside like a rag doll. His broken body hit the ground. He did not move. Jabari screamed, his vision blurred with rage, with grief. Without thinking, he charged. The world narrowed to one thought: kill the beast. His spear plunged deep into the hippo's side. This time, the beast reacted. It roared and swung its head toward him. Jabari ducked, narrowly avoiding the massive tusks. But the hippo twisted. Its bulk slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. The beast loomed over him, blood dripping from its jaws. It was going to finish him. Kamau, despite his injuries, raised his rifle one last time. Boom! The bullet tore through the hippo's throat. The beast staggered. Blood poured from the gaping wound. Its breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps. Jabari scrambled backward. The hippo took a step forward, then another, then finally, its massive legs buckled. With a final heaving breath, it collapsed. The earth shook as the monster fell. Silence. Then the flames crackled. The battle was over. The weeks that followed were quiet. Too quiet. The village rebuilt. The dead were buried. But the scars remained. Jabari stood at the water's edge, watching the rippling surface. Somewhere, in the depths, another pair of eyes might be watching. The river had given them life, and it had taken it away. Kamau stepped beside him. "You still think it was just an animal?" Jabari didn't answer. Instead, he turned away from the water, stepping back toward the village. Kamau sighed. "The river never sleeps, boy." Jabari didn't look back, but as he walked away, the wind shifted, and behind him, just for a moment, the water rippled.